All right, I am in our makeshift studio over here at the Nowata Methodist Church, and I'm the preacher, and I'm Jeffrey, that's my name, and I sit down and I talk with people that I want to talk to because this is America and I can do what I want. So I'm really happy to sit down with Johnathan Long. He's the Baptist preacher over at the Lenapah. Is it First Baptist or just Lenapah Baptist Church?
I've heard both. Lenapah Baptist Church.
Okay, all right.
The old timers would say First Baptist Lenapah. Some of the newer people are Lenapah Baptist Church.
Right on. Okay, so this is not my first conversation with the Baptist. I sat down with Jonathan Wigner, I don't know, a month ago. It was a wonderful conversation, but Johnathan Wigner is not Johnathan Long. We just have two Jonathans in Baptist churches right next to each other. And I know of Johnathan. I actually knew of Johnathan Long before Wigner because you were heading up the Baptist church when the Methodist church up there was closing. And so there was a couple meetings that transpired where y'all were actually able to get the Methodist church building for your ministry. And then it was my understanding that some of the Methodists actually chose to join your church at that point as well. So I've been interested in you, Johnathan, for a while because I have a heart for anybody who does what I do, trying to minister to these small. I mean, nobody knows about these small towns to care about them. But proclaiming the gospel to people who feel like they're insignificant in an insignificant place is very different from preaching in a big city where everybody feels like they're in the heart of it. So I kind of wanted to talk about a number of things. I'm not going to pretend like we were talking for 30 minutes before this while we were sitting down. But I kind of wanted to, what I wanted to start with was you telling us about your church and the ministry of your church in the context of Lenapah. So tell us whatever you think is distinctive or interesting about that.
Yeah. I just finished my second year there. July 13th was my second year of being the pastor there. And God has worked very graciously in our town. And we were at the point where we were growing, and we were like, where are we going to put all these people? Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about our church is we have two families from Lenapah. Everybody else drives in from out of town. We got South Coffeyville, we've got Dewey, we've got Nowata, just several other surrounding towns. So it's kind of a unique church in that aspect, as every church I've been in is people from that town. This one, there's more outsiders than there is insiders locally at that church. So we've grown a lot over the last 2 years, and we were trying to find, and we were praying, and we were looking at trying to build another church, building to keep all the people. And so we were praying about it. We started doing the building committee meetings and looking into that. And of course, with the economy going the direction it is, I mean, we were quickly reaching $500,000 just for a basic church building.
Yes.
And so we were praying about it, and that's when we were approached by the Methodists that were right across the street to our church, and like, hey, if you could use our church building, would that be something you'd be interested in? We're like, what an answer to prayer that God provides. And so we were able to go over there, and we were able to, we used it Wednesday night for our adult prayer meeting. Our youth are in the back, and I think we had 18 teenagers on Wednesday night, and we went on Sunday night. We did a prayer walk at Oklahoma Union Schools, and we met and we prayed for the school year, and then we came to Nowata this last Wednesday, and we did another prayer walk here. And so it was nice to see. I just love it that, they have a heart for missions. We currently work with a church in Malawi, Africa, and we work with providing a salary for one of the pastors there. I've been there 3 times. And
you personally have been there 3 times?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 3 times to Malawi and 1 time to Zimbabwe. And so our Vacation Bible School, we collected money, and we were able to get Bibles, and we sent it over there. And a pastor I work with, Pastor Moses McDonald, he was able to go buy and purchase Bibles for churches, and we take it for granted that we have 10 Bibles in our home.
Yeah.
And to them, to get a Bible is a huge deal.
Right.
And so what a blessing to be a part of that, and a church that's interested in missions. So that many churches aren't, so focused inward versus, going to the nations. And
right.
So, but God is doing a great work there. We baptized 4 people just 3 weeks ago. A good age gap between.
When you say we, were you over there 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh no, not in Malawi, but at our church.
Oh,
in
at your church
Lenapah.
here. Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a young girl who got saved in our Wednesday night program, and then we had a girl who went to youth camp and got saved, and we had a lady that lives in Lenapah, got saved, and then another man that is in his 20s, he got saved, and we got to baptize 4, and I'm excited. I think too many of our baptistries are dry, and we're content with that. And I tell my church all the time, I'm not. I'm like, hey, there's souls to be saved, and we've got a mission. And so I'm excited, and it just really generates enthusiasm amongst the congregation when you see people getting baptized, God doing a work, and saving, and not only just saving, but making a new creation where people are radically changed by the power of the gospel. And that's what I love, and that's why being in a place like Lenapah, it is people like, where's Lenapah at? When you tell them, it's like, well, God has brought people there, and He puts people his people where He wants them, and so to be there and just see, there's so many people in that town that need to hear the gospel just as much as anywhere, and so we're excited to see, and I know we're praying that God does a work there in a revival and brings people in and just changes, because there's that perception so many times with those small towns on what they're like. But what would it be amazing if God got a hold of that town and saved it, and just people just being swept into the kingdom of God.
Sure.
And so that's.
So do you live in Lenapah?
I actually live here in Nowata, out in the
So
country.
you live here in Nowata, but somehow you came to take the pastorate over the Baptist church in Lenapah. Was that similar to the inheriting the Methodist church? Was that something that just kind of fell into your lap, or is that something you worked for?
Kind of. Well, I was on the Washington Osage, the supply list for pastors, and so I used to be the associate pastor at First Baptist Oshaleta.
Okay.
And then kind of ventured out and came through a couple of churches here in town, and then I ended up going up there to do supply for them because their pastor resigned in December before COVID hit.
And it's through the Southern Baptist Convention?
Yeah, the Washington Osage Baptist Association.
Okay.
And which Nowata is included in that.
Okay.
And so they just have a list of qualified pastors.
Okay.
And then they would just go out, and when they need a pastor, they would call. And so one of my friends actually said, hey, they're looking for a pastor up here if you'd be interested in come up preaching. So I reached out and talked to them, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you come out. And so it worked out. I probably preached there probably about a month and a half. And I had some other preaching obligations before that to fulfill. And then it seemed like the Lord just brought it all together in order for us to work that out, and landed in Lenapah.
Right on. Yeah. And your other things I know about you are you just turned 40.
Yes.
And
yes.
You have a full-time job at Voice of the Martyrs. I know about this.
Yes.
So were you born here?
I was born in Bartlesville.
Okay, so born in Bartlesville, and you end up in Nowata, working at Voice of the Martyrs, preaching in Lenapah at a Baptist church. What's the things that's happened in between? Who are you?
I started off when I graduated. I went to the Army National Guard.
You graduated from Bartlesville?
Actually, I went to Dewey Public Schools, and I went to Wesleyan, and at the time, Wesleyan only went through middle school.
Okay.
And so graduated Dewey 2001, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? And of course, the recruiters are very good at.
And were you born into a believing family? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I had both of my grandfathers were deacons in Baptist churches, and so I had that influence of them, and just to see that influence of prayer growing up, of homes that pray. That's significant in seeing that, and I really allude to that a lot. Is growing up, I was seeing families go down at the invitation and pray, and shed tears for their lost friends or their family, and that really set on me heavily.
This is an experience you regularly had in worship. Was an altar call for families to come forward and pray at the altar, and be you got to see your parents, your grandparents kneel and speak with the Lord.
Yeah.
How could that not be influential?
Yeah, absolutely. And So just, having that influence growing up. And so I left and came back. Then I met a lady from Nowata.
You just brushed over Army National Guard, I think.
Yeah.
You left and went to the Army National
Yeah,
Guard.
I went to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay.
And I did 9 weeks of basic training, and then I went back after Christmas Exodus, did our advanced individual training, and finished that, came back, and I served actually in Pawhuska at their unit, and then it eventually was closed, and then to Bartlesville. And then at that time, I started working at Walmart administration after I just got back from basic training to do something, and that's when I met my wife.
Oh, perfect.
She's from Nowata.
At Walmart, huh?
Yeah, the administration building. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, doing benefits and claims. Well, she asked me to if I would be able to assist her with her benefits, and so I'm still assisting with her benefits.
Yeah, right. I like that joke.
Yeah.
That's not the first time you told that joke.
No, not at all, not at all. So we've been married this last May 19 years.
Wonderful.
And we have 3 children. Zach and Jackson both go here to Nowata. Zach starting his junior year of high school. Jackson going into 2nd grade, and Lord provided us a daughter to finish that off. So I got a 2-year-old daughter.
Oh, wonderful.
So we have one in each phase of life.
I have a 2-year-old daughter. I didn't know you had a 2-year-old daughter.
Yeah,
That's fun.
Yep, Kaylee Grace came along, and that was a very trying time, and it all goes back to God's timing, because my father-in-law is a farmer here, and but he was diagnosed with cancer, and he got cancer. We found out, and then I was flying to Malawi for 2 weeks. So I left after we find that out. Well, most of the time when you think of cancer, you think, maybe years, treatment, things like that. Well, then that's not how it went at all. After we came back, he probably had another couple of weeks, and he passed away.
Oh, my.
So he went in for gallbladder surgery, and it ended up being stage 4 cancer, and it was cancer of unknown origin. And so we went through that. And so my wife, she was pregnant with our daughter at that time. And so through all of that, then the stress of that, we had our daughter premature. So we ended up in the NICU for the rest of the year. We got released the day before the new year. And but just to see God's hand, throughout all of that, and then just holding you through that. And I mean, right now it's been 2 years, and you just go, like, man, how did all that happen? And you look back, and I tell people all the time, when you look at it, it wasn't you holding on to God, it was God holding on to you through all of it. And
you ever hear that corny footprints in the sand story?
I have, yeah.
And I've hated it since the day I heard it, but then I've been like, well, but that is how it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Sometimes corny things are true, and the Lord really does. For anyone listening to this, I didn't know what a NICU was before I had our first daughter went into the NICU, but it's the ICU for neonatal is what the N stands for. But it's a terrible situation to have a baby in the NICU and just be worried about that precious little new life. And that was our first child. The next 3 have all been, thank God, healthy and normal, but the first one was really a trial. To have that coupled with a death in the family, suffering and death out of nowhere, around all that movement is just quite stressful. But also to be able to see God's hand in that is really quite a blessing. I don't know how much you know about Methodists. Methodists typically associate themselves with the Arminian tradition around discerning God's sovereignty and the dynamic between him and human free will. You come from, so Baptists aren't explicitly Reformed, I don't think. I don't think you have to be Reformed to be a Baptist, do you?
No.
But you would definitely subscribe to a Reformed theology in which, so I imagine, I talked to you before we began here, you did watch Johnathan Wigner's interview with me. He did his best to explain, the term I had heard it was double predestination. He talked about it being, I do not remember the term he used, but it sounded nicer. I liked it.
Yeah.
But as you see these tragedies and losses and trials in life, you are receiving that as of God's design and authorship and gifting to you for your edification, growth. Well, I'm trying to make sure my language around that is all good. I find myself increasingly sympathetic to that way of going through life because if you don't have a strong God, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
within seminary, we had to study something called process theology, which argues that God is ever all present, but not all powerful. And at that point, you're going, okay, why am I worshiping Him then?
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
and I never found a satisfactory answer to that. But if God is in control of history, and not just the big parts, but even the small particular parts, He knows you He knows how many hairs you have on your head. Yeah. He made you in your mother's womb. He has planned out a whole life for you. I don't like the language of God has a plan. But I do like the language of God is in charge, or God is on His throne, or the God is sovereign, I guess would be the best statement. But for someone who doesn't believe that God is sovereign in that way, losing your father-in-law, having a baby in the NICU, all of that can really be a feeling of God not being with you, God having abandoned you, God not. But for you and people like you and me, increasingly, we go through hard times like that and go, God is with me.
Yeah.
God has designed, and I'm going to be better for this scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful testimony. I wanted to ask you more about the interview with Johnathan, because Johnathan is distinctive. Not you, Johnathan, Johnathan Wigner.
Yeah.
He's distinct in that he's not exactly King James onlyist, but something close. He really thinks it's on par with the Hebrew and the Greek translation.
Yeah.
He very comfortable in Reformed theology and his whole disposition. And when I asked him point blank, what is Baptist theology? What is distinctive about Baptist doctrine? The way I remember it was, you have to be submerged and you have to be a true believer. And that was really it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask another Baptist, and I have not asked another Baptist since that conversation.
Yeah.
Is that really essentially the only distinctive doctrine of the Baptist tradition, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah. I
In your opinion?
Yeah.
This is not a statement on, Johnathan Wigner is obviously a very learned guy.
Yeah.
But as you understand the Baptist tradition to be, as you participate in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think, regeneration is huge and crucial in as far as being born again. Today we use that word so loosely. I heard it all the time growing up. When I was like,
it's a political label, right? I'm born again Christian.
Yeah. And so you're just like, you meet someone on the street, I'm born again. What does that even mean now?
Sure.
Because everybody said that. But I think that, for as far as being a Christian, that it is, a supernatural work of God where He saves you and makes you a new creation, for His glory, and He has prepared works for you before the foundation of the world to carry out. And, we should walk in those. And so that, and we do, I agree 100% with the baptism of full immersion in baptism. And so, we do have two ordinances that we follow, which is the Lord's Supper being one, and baptism by immersion. And so,
I don't know if you know this, but those last things you've talked about, other than the immersion part, you all have in common with Methodists. So Methodist sprinkle, I'm not sure I feel good about that anymore. I hope my DS doesn't watch that. But we definitely, or at least the early Methodists, talked a lot and were very clear about baptism, regeneration, and baptism being associated with that, but not necessarily causing that. So regeneration being important, but also the thing you just now talked about, the good works proceeding out of a faith that God gives us, that we don't give ourselves. Like a lot of that, there's a lot more overlap than difference. The thing that, you ever heard the John MacArthur confessing he's a Baptist thing?
I don't think I have. I don't think I've
Well,
heard
he
that.
doesn't own that label, but he was meeting with a Baptist preacher, and he said, John, do you believe that justified believers should be baptized? And he said, yeah. He said, do you believe that they should be submerged? Yes. He said, then you are a Baptist. And he retells that fondly. But as hearing Johnathan talk about it and then hearing you talk about it, it seems to me that a lot of believers are Baptist and they don't know it. The other thing I wanted to ask you, we talked about practical ways of doing church, and he was clear that at least in his church, the only people who are baptized are people that have appeared before the assembly and gone through some kind of somewhat formal ceremony of having their faith examined,
Yeah.
and then there being a consensus among the body that they should be baptized. How common is that? Is that something your church does?
Yeah, we usually will have them after conversion, because we want to make sure, because I think too many churches today are worried about numbers for baptism.
Right, yeah.
I mean, we had this amount of people get baptized, and my concern isn't that at all. My concern is, are you still walking with the Lord 5 years from now?
Yes.
Is it genuine? And so, I will meet with them and talk with them and see. And then I explain to them that evidence of true conversion is that what God started you in today, as Philippians 1:6 says, he who began a good work and you will see
Bring
it
it
through
to
to
completion.
completion.
Yeah.
That 5 years from now, you're still going to be walking with the Lord.
Right.
And if you walk away from the faith, that it's you were never of us. You weren't really truly converted, and you have great reason to fear. And so I think it's good to give them the Bible. I think so many times we've moved away from being biblical. We just want to tell people, because we're focused on large numbers, to brag about to other churches. I hate that. I mean, you don't see, how can we grow a big church? Well, if God brings the addition, then God will bring the increase of
Yes.
those that are in your church.
Well, and that's a part of me that's tempted to be envious of you, because you were able to apparently baptize 4 people that were genuinely converted. And I feel like I preach, and I know I preach the true word here every Sunday, and yet I haven't baptized anybody for some time. And a number of the people that I baptized have fallen away, which is really discouraging. And then simultaneously, I'm watching other churches baptize people that don't even know how to navigate their Bibles,
Right.
don't even know how to pray, don't even know how to tell someone about Jesus. And I think they're raising up children for the evil one, to be honest with you. When
Yeah.
you convince someone they're a Christian at such a low standard,
Yeah.
I think that kind of like inoculates them against
Yeah.
the tradition. So I don't know. I mean, how much of I don't know what questions there are after that. It's just okay with the 4 baptisms that you had. Do you think that that's God bringing the increase, and that y'all really did nothing except just be present and preach the word? Or do you feel like there's something to be said for a certain method of evangelism that is perhaps more effective, not just at bringing people in, but helping them understand the high standards of Christ?
Yeah. As far as the baptism, I just think you be faithful to preaching a biblical gospel, telling men what they are before God, and then telling them
Sinners.
Yeah, sinners. Yeah,
Deserving
I'm glad you
damnation and
say that,
punishment, yes.
Because I have a story about that. I called the church, asking them kind of their position on some modern issues going on, homosexuality, and the pastor said, "Well, we don't use old-fashioned words like sin." And I'm like, "Well, didn't Jesus come to save sinners?"
Yeah. Biblical words like sin? You don't use the words in the Bible to talk about the Bible?
Right.
Okay, sure.
Right. So
Okay.
it goes back to that. They want to build a big church, tickle men's ears
Yeah.
to build that up. But I think it's, being faithful where God has brought you to be, being faithful to the text, preaching what God has given us in his word. We're ambassadors. So an ambassador, you have a message that's been given to you. You have no right to change it or, try to do it however you see fit in order to how you think. I mean, that pragmatism, Methodist church or methods that different churches had, we look and we say, well, this was successful here. And we're like, well, we got to mimic that really quick, because
Right.
obviously it really worked.
Yeah.
So, well, if it worked, it was God. It wasn't the method. I think we put too much in, being pragmatic about, ideas or
Sure.
things that God did. I'm like, God can work through so many different means.
Right.
And I just be faithful to the Bible.
Right.
And I think that's why we've gone so far away in the American churches, because we went away from the Bible and tried to find other things. That was my heart coming to Lenapah, and I told them, I said, if you want me here, we're going to the Bible, and we're
Right.
going to stick with it. And if you don't like it, you can fire me, or go on, because we have, one message, and that's what, we're going to talk and preach about is what God has given to us through his word. And because it's the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, and I think we've forgotten that because if we have this method or this means in order to accomplish this,
right,
then we can be fine with growing our church. And I just go back to the gospel and seeing it. That's what transformed lives. We can't do it as individuals, but we know the gospel can through the word of God being proclaimed and faithfully proclaimed, calling people sinners. And but as people don't like to hear that. Well, look at our nation right now. We're sinners. We love sin. We drink it down, and everywhere you look, you can't turn it on. But I think it's so much of the influence of the world is coming to the church.
So let's offer some. Well, you're already offering many strong statements, but statements that I'm sure you would make are, unless a person understands themselves to be a sinner, they cannot be saved.
Right.
So a number of people sitting in pews today who never identified as a sinner are not saved.
Right.
There are a ton of people sitting in pews today that are not saved, who think they're saved.
Right. And being in the Bible Belt, Bodie Bauckham says it best, I think, is here you have to get people lost before they know they need to be found.
Yeah, see, that's the hard thing about, and I see you have a heart for mission. In seminary, there were a number of South Korean students that came, and many of them said, "It's my understanding that I'm here as a missionary," because a lot of people here think they know the gospel, but they don't. And they would, you're witnessing to a generation that is in some sense post-Christian, but doesn't realize it's post-Christian.
Right. Yeah.
They put on and take off labels with such ease, and they feel like an identity is something that you get to own and put on. And so I say, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. Who are you to tell me otherwise?
Right.
And of course, that bleeds out into a number of other directions. Yeah. Let's rewind and talk about you a little bit more, because you didn't stay at Walmart.
Right.
You didn't stay a newlywed. You guys have been married 19 years. You're no longer at Walmart. What's happened in between? You had kids. You talked about the kids.
Yeah. I had 3 kids, good marriage. And the last 4 years, I've been out at Voice of the Martyrs in Bartlesville.
Very good. So I want everybody to know what Voice of the Martyrs is and does, because a lot of people don't know about it.
So Voice of the Martyrs is a unique ministry in this aspect, is we only deal with Christians who are dealing with some type of persecution. So we work in countries most people won't dare to even go in, but Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, North Korea is one we work in, several countries throughout South Africa. And we find the way to get in there to help the brothers and sisters that are in there, because the scripture tells us to remember those that are in chains or in prison. Mm-hmm. And so that is where their ministry is unique, because that is their whole operation, is to get relief to Christians who are suffering the worst type of persecution that there is. We had a brother here that was from Iraq, and he was talking about some of the people that were in his church. Well, the Taliban got a hold of them, 3 of them, and they said, you just got to renounce your faith and you get to live. And so the first one, they shot him point blank in the face, and looked at the second guy and said, this is your same fate. If you will recount your faith, then we'll let you live. And they shot him point blank in the head. And so, the third guy, I mean, you just got to imagine what's going through his head. But, you would think that a bullet would be fine. Well, they threatened him to put acid on his face, burn his face off. And he said, if you don't, we're going to put your face in the acid. And he said, I cannot stop worshiping Christ.
Yeah.
And so they put his head in the acid, and then they literally burned it, and it burned his face off. And I know it kind of turns your stomach, and it should.
Right, yeah.
But that's what our brothers and sisters are going through. And then after they did it, they shot him. And a brother from North Korea that came over, he was really agitated with the Western church, because he said, I always hear you guys talking about the persecuted church. And he's like, brothers, there's only one church. And yes, we're persecuted, but we're a part of the same body as you are.
Right.
But just to hear these brothers and sisters, under the worst and most extreme cases, be able to stand strong for the faith. I mean, they're paying it with their lives, their livelihoods, being kicked out of their communities. And the difficulties are just numerous. And so another thing that they do there is smuggle Bibles into those countries. That's part I'm very passionate about that, and I love that they do that. But they find unique ways to do that. Whether it's through the chips in the back of your cell phones, you take them out, clear that out, you can download the Bible onto that, take it in, customs immigration. You're looking at it and you're like, oh look, just chips, let it go through. Well, the believers can get it, put it in their phone, download the Bible, and hide that chip. Then they have access to the Bible.
Nice.
And you just think about it here. We have 10 Bibles at our home, and these people are willing to risk their life to get Bibles to the believers there.
Right.
And when I went to South Africa, it's probably been 2 years ago, we met with a brother in South Johannesburg, and he just got back from trying to get gospel tracts and Bibles into North Korea. And so they would take them and fill up big air balloons, put gospel tracts in them and little chips in.
Oh, wow.
Take it over. They'd find somebody to take them and look at the current and of the air.
Yeah.
Let them go, and they'll pop. People find them.
Okay.
And they've gotten good results by that. And
wow.
to say all that, it is extreme persecution, but you also hear of God doing great works in those places.
Oh, sure.
The church is pure there because there's a cost to following Christ. If you say you're a believer there, it could very well cost you your life.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
China, the hard labor camps you could be sentenced to, and not only do they come after you, they come after your whole family. So,
Yeah, that's the part that's particularly scary for me. It's, I don't know. I don't remember when I started reading accounts of people in the persecuted church, but the thing that has provided the biggest challenge for me in my adult life has been maintaining moral clarity. So Christians have been getting martyred from the beginning.
Yeah.
And one of the earlier ones, his name was Polycarp. And he has a wonderful, the soldiers come to get him, and he welcomes them in and feeds them dinner.
Yeah.
And then they try to burn him to death, and this force field develops with the fire, and then they just end up stabbing him. But they give him a chance to recant, and it's a similar, how can I recant on my Lord who's been so good to me all my life, But all throughout that, it's just him. They're not hurting his family. They're not raping his wife. They're not killing his kids.
Yeah.
And when you realize that faith, when you read about these women in Iran now who their husbands have been killed because they're Christians, and then their daughters are sold into sex slavery, it's really hard to maintain that clarity of it's worth it,
Right.
And so that. I don't think there's anything short and quick to say about that. I think there's just continually looking upon the people who live and die that way, and see that God is glorified, even if it's also simultaneously grotesque and immeasurably tragic.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, what the crucifixion of Christ was like, grotesque and tragic, but also beautiful beyond compare.
Yeah.
So you work at Voice of the Martyrs. When you go to Malawi, you're not one of these secret agents. Malawi, it's not illegal, right?
No,
Yeah.
it is not legal. Unfortunately, though, the Boko Haram and that group are working their way into the more southern regions of Africa and spreading. It's funny when you fly into places that we've flown into Ethiopia and Addis Ababa in the airport. They have a mosque right in the middle of the airport. Our ladies, got spit on by the Muslims that are there. So it's a culture shock immediately, because you're like, you're not Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
When you see that reality. But there are different ways, though, that they are getting them as far as a different type of persecution. Well, they come in, and the Muslims in Malawi will come into the Baptist churches and say, well, if you convert to Islam, we'll pay for your children to go to school, because here we have public schools. You just take your kid and drop them off. There's no cost. And in many different countries, there's a cost to going to school. And if your family's poor, your kids just aren't going. So the Muslims will come in and they'll say, well, we'll pay for your children all their education. And this was some of the questions from the pastors. Well, how do we deal with this? Because people are leaving to go over there because they can offer their kid a future.
Right.
And we can't. We don't have the means or the money to do that. And so, or they'll come in and they'll marry their daughters. And if you marry a Muslim, you have to convert to Islam. And so we're faced with that. But again, it goes back to, well, they have things to give, a future. And it goes back to being a parent.
Yeah.
Hey, you want your kids to have a good future.
Right, yeah.
And so it's like, okay, live in extreme poverty. I mean, when you go over there, they eat a meal once every 3 days. And they call us weak Americans.
Yeah.
We're having to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right.
We eat every 3 days. And so we like the opposite of that. We're like, well, I can give my kids a life, a future, money, prosperity. And, it's hard to look at my eye, but, you go back to the Bible. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And just to hold on and cling to that text. And also to remind the parents in that, you may be giving them everything in this life, but if they lose in the next, what do they really gain?
Yeah.
Life is so short here.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
especially there, the life expectancy rate is not very old, 40, 50, with disease and just, many things.
In
that they
Malawi.
face. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to, you can reason it that way. Still looking at your child suffering is hard.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I know how privileged I am. I'll sit in bed at night and think about what it's like for a father like me to be in an unsafe place in the world where, I've read stories of people breaking into Christians' houses in the middle of the night with machetes,
Yeah.
What? I can't imagine. I try to condition myself to have a faith that resembles theirs.
Yeah.
Because I believe the body is one.
Right,
I believe
right.
there's not the church over there and the church over here. There's just the church,
Right, right, absolutely.
But I think that means that, we share our burdens and our successes, and we share in a common vision of what Christian maturity looks like, and being able and willing to endure persecution. And, part of me sometimes hops on the wagon of Christians are being persecuted in America. People speak badly of us and make fun of us and call us names. But then most of the time I'm going, no, what we're going through is nothing like what believers are going through in other parts of the world. And to use the same word for that seems to me disrespectful of people who actually risk their lives and livelihoods and family members to glorify God. So, to listen to someone like you, the clear answer to what is to be done, well, there's several things that you've already spoken that clearly interrelate. One is missions, being connected to an actual mission site, not just monetarily, but also bodily when you can.
Yeah.
Another is telling the stories, as you've done here, just a couple stories. There's hundreds of thousands of stories, telling the stories of these people so that the people who hear them can be inculcated in that way of life.
Yeah.
But another is a renunciation of distinctively American Christianese culture. Something that resembles Christianity, sounds like Christianity, but is a counterfeit that is not equipping us for lives of suffering and solidarity with the persecuted church.
Yeah.
So when we talked about topics that would be good for us to talk about, one was persecution and another one was revival and the state of the American pulpit. And we've talked about the power of the word to convert people and lead them to baptism. What else needs to be said? We're not going to have hundreds of thousands of people watch this. We might have a couple hundred. As people in this region are watching two pastors talk about, we're just little Hicktown pastors, but we've got the same Bible as every Christian across history.
Yeah.
What's there to be said that could potentially, for a listener, give clarity about why it is when they're turning on the TV and watching big rich preachers on Christian Broadcasting Network, or when they're listening to pastors on the radio, it's not just the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. It's not just moralistic therapeutic deism. This whole family of counterfeit American Christianese thought. Is it just clear black and white, right and wrong? If it's American, if it's from a privileged place, be skeptical? Or what are some of the hallmarks people need to look out for? Where can we be very clear? These are signs of not true Christianity. These are signs of true Christianity. If you are not in a church right now, here's the kind of church to gravitate toward. If you were looking at Christians to model yourself off of, here are the Christians that you should be looking at their fruits. What kind of fruits should you look at to decide what Christians to follow?
Yeah. There's several things. Is my church biblical? does my church.
So everybody's going to say, yes, my church is biblical. So tell them how to actually navigate.
Yeah.
Let me take a time out just real quick.
Yeah.
I'm in the United Methodist Church. This denomination, last I checked, has like 11 million people in it.
Yeah.
Started off in North America, made the mistake of doing missions, planting some churches in the Philippines, in Eastern Europe, in Africa. And we have this global connection now. We get together every 4 years in what's called a general conference. Now, what's happened is predictable. Most of the churches in America went way left. Even if they didn't completely give up on the Bible, they've definitely not held the standard in the banner. Very consumeristic Christianity. But we get together every 4 years with these Africans who are saying, look, we can be killed for our faith where we are.
Yeah.
We're dealing with demons where we are.
Yeah.
You guys, you don't know this faith that you gave us. We know it. Let us bring it back to you. And all the while, the American Methodists are going, we have the same Bible as you. We're preaching the Bible. We've just been shown something different by God. And you have this awful, we're about to split. We're in the process of splitting right now. They're not letting the Africans go. Anyway, there is a lack of basic discernment on the part of not just like normal people, but people that have gone to seminary, people that have been in the church all their lives, to be able to discern the distinction between what is really a biblical church and what's a church that reads the Bible to justify what they already believe.
Right.
So is there any succinct way of kind of helping a person hold a litmus up to that in their lives?
Yeah. Well, I think, besides, the Bible is church history, looking out, through is what my church teaching and preaching lining up with church history, going back to the apostles, because today we're in a time where everybody has their own truth, and that's seeped into the church, and that's how we're seeing the mess that we're in today is because we don't believe in absolute truth anymore. We say, well, my truth is right, your truth is wrong.
Who are you to tell me what is true? I have my truth.
Yeah.
There is no truth with a capital T. There is no external truth.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, when you see that with people and you sit down and, like, let's go back to our Bible. Well, this is my opinion on the matter.
Right.
And so this is the thing is if you understand Scripture, you've died to your own opinion. And you no longer have an opinion.
Yeah. David Platt said something a couple of years ago in a Bible study. If your pastor asks, what does this mean to you? Get out of there.
Yeah.
Because nobody cares what it means to you. We care about what it means.
Right.
And there's a very big difference there.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
I keep interrupting you.
Yeah, no worries. Looking at church history, seeing if this is what the church throughout we're continuing for, the gospel that's been handed down to us, looking back to see, is my church teaching the biblical doctrines that have
So
been
you've
passed
already
down.
said something. I'm going to interrupt you again because I can't. A lot of people want to believe that Christianity is something you can just show up to church and get and not have to do any of your own homework. You've already said you got to do your homework, man. You got to read some history.
Yeah.
So we've already said some harsh statements. Would it be possible to say you really can't be a Christian? Well, no. Okay, so this was not to be a Christian. This was to discern if your church is a biblical church. But what would you say to someone who says you cannot be a Christian unless you're doing some homework and some critical thinking in your own life?
I think if God has saved you, that as you grow in that knowledge, because we got to remember that Paul said we're babes in Christ when we first start.
Sure, yeah.
Because a lot of people start. I was reading people that I would absolutely read at all today. I hate to admit this, but at one point I had Your Best Life Now, Joel Osteen.
Sure, yeah.
So you look at that book and looking back, you're like, wow, that doesn't line up for Scripture at all. Can you imagine handing a copy of Your Best Life Now to the disciples?
There was a Babylon Bee op-ed from Joel Osteen to the Africans like 4 years ago saying, what's wrong with you guys? Don't you know that you can just claim it and be like rich and happy? And you guys are just choosing to be these persecuted poor people. And it shows the ridiculousness of all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would say that maybe it's understandable for a babe not to know how to do that kind of study and reflection. But once we're really instantiated in Christ, we should be exercising our free time to be growing, not just in knowledge of the Bible, but in those things that highlight the truth of the gospel and the Bible throughout all of history.
Yeah. I think
I don't think I've heard a lot of pastors talk about the importance of studying church history. Does that go over well with your Baptist people?
People really are bored with history. I mean, you think about a high school, American history and world history, church history. I mean, they see it as a bore. And so, I mean, it's easy to see where we are now because people stop studying history and looking at it. And I think partially it goes back to, the Bible talked about older men and older women teaching younger men. I think that partly is you teach in a biblical church, as we were talking about, is you have to have people willing to invest time to teach the younger generation history of the church. This is where we were, this is what we came through, and this is where we are now.
Yeah.
And that's what oftentimes where I find it lacking with people in the church, especially men. We find men, who make excuses. But if you talk to them about the OU Sooners, I could tell you every stat.
Yeah.
Every single, person on the team. I could tell you the backup to the backup to the backup kicker, everything. And you're like, well, tell me about church history, because you say Christ is someone you love above everything else. Tell me about your God. Oh, I don't know much about the Bible. That's, and we really kind of give them a pass on it. But I mean, where are the men at that to come in, or even the ladies to teach, the Bible and teach history to a younger generation? And we have to be willing to go back, read the Whitfields and the Wesleys and the Great Awakening, and we'd be here for a long time, talking about it. But
well, let me tie that into a practical, logistical thing I've wondered about you, because you already said you have 19 youth in your youth program in Lenapah, Oklahoma. Is that you doing that? I've done youth ministry. It takes a lot of legwork. It takes making connections with families and building and earning trust and coordinating events. Is that you, or is that a layperson in your church that is doing all that legwork?
We have a youth pastor. His name is Reed.
Okay, you have a youth pastor.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a pretty recent thing.
Okay.
But in the meantime, up to this, we had a wonderful lady named Carrie. She worked with the youth, but they're very much so into evangelism. And one of the things I would brag on them about is, they're not just staying in, singing some silly songs and playing games. They're going to their Bible, but what is beautiful about it is Reed was telling me the other day that he was out walking because they're going house to house. We got a bunch of gospel tracts from Ray Comfort. We won I
only recently discovered Ray Comfort.
Oh yeah, he's
a guy.
Yeah, great resource on sharing the gospel.
Sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, so he was going up and down the street, and he said he'd look over to the left, and there was two teenagers standing up on a porch praying with someone from Lenapah, and he looked on the other side, and another two teenagers sitting up there, and I'm like, what a great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to people's homes, and I give the adults a hard time, and I'm like, hey, I mean, are we asking something our teenagers to do that we are not willing to do ourselves as adults?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think we put this unnecessary burden on the youth. You go to youth camp, you get fired up for God, come back, and we'll watch you, and we'll be here if you need something. And I'm like, it goes back to, leading them and showing them.
Right.
And so that they spend quite a bit of time with those guys. Good. And going up there and praying with them at the school.
There's a girl connected to the Methodist Church in Delaware that went to your church's church camp that y'all went to a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Loved it. Got to a new place in her relationship with Jesus. She's feeling great. I've just been really grateful for that, and I think it's great to be able to take kids to the mountaintop. And you're right, we often fumble the ball afterwards when we're not able to walk with them once they've been there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw a weird curveball at you. I'm going to see what you do with it. And it's not with the spirit of challenge. It's a thing I've been thinking about. I read this book that rocked my world about 4 years ago called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. It's written by a Mennonite historian. And he characterizes the first 300 years of the church as a body that was concerned with the virtue of patience more than really any church anywhere is today.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they distinctively believed doctrinally was that Christ gave the Great Commission only to those 11 whenever he was about to ascend into heaven, and that it did not carry over past those 11. That the role of the church was not to bring good news to the nations. That's what the 12 did once they got Matthias on board. Their job is just to live faithfully, collectively every day. And then what happened was people were so drawn to them by their way of life, despite the fact that they kept it secret. They had bouncers at the door that would keep people from coming in to worship if they were uninitiated.
Yeah.
Despite that fact, over the course of 300 years, they went from what was called a cult, a tiny little sectarian movement in Judea, to 10% of the Roman population, Roman Empire population. Yeah. And then it was only at that point that the theology shifted to being less patient, more focused on evangelism, more focused on let's get everybody in here. And then the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah.
So within a lot of Western, I would consider faithful Christianity, there is a great concern for evangelism and revival. And we have a lot of history on that, cycles of that. Yeah. But if you listen to this guy that I was just talking about, the authentic Christian disposition, at least for the first 300 years, is not focused on revival or evangelism at all, but just daily faithfulness. Yeah. Nothing exciting, just faithfulness. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be put on trial. It's just the daily grind of taking up your cross, following Christ. Yeah. Do those seem like two opposite things to you, or does it seem like there is a synthesis that's possible? Does it seem like there's more truth in one approach than the other? I'm genuinely interested to hear mature Christians think out loud about this.
Yeah, I think there is something to that, because I think the contrast between the natural man and the Christian should be so obvious, and they are opposites. And so because of that, I think there would be an attraction, like what's different about you in looking at that. So I do believe heavily, though, upon missions, going and preaching. I mean, there's still unreached people groups that haven't heard the name of Christ.
Right.
And so someone has to go. But on the other side of that, as we live day to day where God has placed us, the difference between us and the world should be so evident that they're asking, what's different about this person? And let me just give you an example. When COVID hit, everybody's like, we're all going to die. I mean, even the churches, like, we look like we were scared. Many churches are like, we got to close, we got to be protected. And, And do Christians not believe death is gain? If God has really numbered our days, numbered the hairs of our head, and He's in control, then in this moment, while the world is like, oh, we're going to die, the Christian's like, yeah, we already know. Yeah. That's a certain thing. But for us, we have this faith in Christ that is unshakable, even in the most, circumstances that we don't know everything that's going on right now. We don't know what this virus is when it first came out and all these things. Like, hey, we're a rock. We're not shakable because we're like, our foundation is Christ. Right. And so Paul would tell us, hey, death is gain for the Christian. So if you die, you get to go be with the one you love. So, there is a huge difference. So I think there is a lot of merit to that, because I think...
living differently. Yeah, and the people that preach revival and evangelism wouldn't argue against that at all. I mean, anyone who's worth their salt and has been reading the same Bible knows we lead radically transformed lives, not just different interior lives, but what's on the inside gets lived out on the outside. But it's the nature of, I don't remember if it was before we started filming or not, but there are many churches that their strategy for evangelism is marketing. What works? What's the method? I think it's while we were filming. And what you have in the early church is this utterly unconcerned approach to evangelism, which is, if God brings them, He brings them, but we're not going to try and make it happen. And this complete indifference to, we can't save people. We not only are we not going to try, we can't. Right. God will bring them but the influence they had on ancient Roman society, they repulsed them in some ways and attracted them in others. They repulsed them in how judgmental they were, because they would make public pronouncements against the debauchery of their day. Yeah, they would not participate in a number of civic functions because they were centered around other gods. They were called atheists because they didn't believe in most of the gods. So people hated them until they watched them get persecuted and saw that they didn't return evil for evil. That's a distinctive thing about Christians. They didn't defend themselves. They didn't even call down God's judgment upon their persecutors. And when they were persecuted together, they would comfort one another in the midst of their persecution. They were known by their love. So you had this repulsion and then this attraction, and over time there was just this way in which it wasn't the intellectuals. They had intellectuals. They had apologists that were wonderful. But it was the everyday faith of just ignorant believers that just knew who they're, I know whom I have believed and persuaded he is able to take that which I've committed. Yeah. And that was their faith, and that was enough. And I think we're tempted today to believe that ancient way of being Christian is not effective anymore, or at least not as effective as the loud, public, showy, entertainment, attractional ministry is what we used to call it. And so I'm drawn in particular to voices that don't care much for the entertainment stuff. Yeah. The problem is the loudest voices are the ones still in big, entertaining, dynamic churches. Yeah. And so that's what's unique about the conversation you and I are having, where we quite simply don't have the resources to be big and flashy and entertaining. Yeah. And in different ways, our ministries are bearing fruit. And in other ways, big city pastors and churches would look at this and go, oh, God, I could not do that. Oh, that just seems so awful. Yeah. But, as I'm thinking about what it's like to do church in developing parts of the world, what it was like in the ancient church, I think what we're doing in small churches in rural America, rural settings, is much closer to that. It just often feels to me that big, rich city churches are doing something very different. Yeah. And I'm not going to straight up say it's not Christianity, but I'm going to say it's hard for me to read my Bible and then look at that and go, oh, yeah, that's the same. Right. So we should probably wrap this up. What can we end on? Okay, exhortation for someone who's made it through this interview. What is an encouragement that you would offer to someone who's made it this far? Maybe they're going, man, these guys are judgmental jerks. Or maybe they're going, man, this is different from anything I've heard on TV yet. Yeah. How would you have them process this conversation that we've had?
I would say, that whatever they're going through, God is faithful to look throughout, great is thy faithfulness is a hymn that we sing. And if you think about that, it's easy to sing when everything's going good. You think about the brothers that are in severe persecution and going through that, and they're singing, great is thy faithfulness. Mm-hmm. And what a testimony to the power of God to work through that. And, to process this is, we got to be prepared to live for our faith and, stop looking for people to entertain us and look for a church that'll give us the Bible and tell us, thus saith the Lord, not, this is what I think, this is, but just to understand, that we are living in a time of itching ears, and people are seeking out, people will tell them what they want to hear, and instead of what I need to hear. And I think that's a big problem is, I go to church, so I want to hear this, or I want to hear that, and find somebody who's going to tell you what you need to hear. I mean, is it well with your soul where you're at when you look at yourself? Are you prepared to meet God? I mean, that's a very important question to ask. And I mean, if we're focused on secondary issues or issues that don't matter at all, but we're building up big crowds, and you die and you go to hell, then what good was your pastor? And so I just believe that so much to get back to the Bible, and that's where God has placed His power in His book. We don't have to look to other means, other methods, all that to return to that, and just not be satisfied with the way things are. One thing that I didn't really think of, but the prayer meeting. There's so many things that we've started in the spirit that we want to finish in the flesh. And you look at that and you see kind of the areas where most churches have eliminated the prayer meeting. They don't want to pray anymore. Well, a Chinese pastor came to America, and he looked and he said, as he's getting ready to leave, what do you think of the American churches? And he said, well, I'm really amazed at how much you can do without God. And so, yeah.
Sick burn.
Yeah. And so you just think of it like that.
Wow, I've never heard that before. Oh, that hurts.
Yeah. And you give testimony to that to the prayer meeting, because I mean, you say, hey, we're going to pray. People come at me all the times, eschatology, the signs of the times. We see it all, and being discerning and everything. And I'm like, well, wouldn't it be a time to pray, to come together? I'm like, well, let's have a prayer meeting. And then 2 people show up.
Uh-huh.
And, it seems like it's across the board in the American churches. We lost focus.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And I'm like, why don't we want to pray? Because
Well, and something else that's crazy, my brother worshiped with an Eastern Orthodox church when he lived in Columbia, Missouri. And they would have monthly, I don't remember, regular gatherings of the church just to hear the scriptures read aloud for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Standing in silence. They would let the little kids play, but the kids were hearing it.
Yeah.
If you tried to do that in any church around here, nobody would show up.
Right.
And there are some churches in America that manage it, but they're not the ones that built this nation. Ooh, that's tacky. Sorry. That's somebody calling me. So yes, there's a high scriptural calling and standard that I think the good thing is that some people can see it and comprehend it. But I asked straight up from the pulpit here one time, what if we put together a scripture reading for an hour and a half? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but why do you think most people would not show up? And a girl present just said, I think it'd be really boring.
Yeah.
It's just like, man, I'm not doing my job. I'm not doing my job if you guys think the scriptures are boring. But it's maybe, I don't know. The other implication is even worse. I'm not going to speak that out loud.
Yeah.
But so I asked you for an exhortation. The exhortation would be, don't be satisfied with where you are. You said those words. And then the original exhortation he had was just to hold up what your Bible's doing, what your faith is doing up against what you read in the Bible and against Christian history.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to do that work, well, how about this? How about I end with a prayer for people who don't want to do that work?
Yeah,
and then can I give a general blessing for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. That'll be how we conclude. Father, I want to thank you for this conversation I've had with Johnathan and for his faithful witness and ministry. It's really a joy just to learn about other men serving God and the path that brought him to where he is. I thank you for his years of ministry before you brought him to Lenapah, and I ask that you would bless his ministry while he's in Lenapah, as you've seen fit to do so far. I want to ask that you would bind him and Johnathan Wigner and Van Longbonds and the other pastors that I've had conversations with in this region. I just pray that you would bind us together in one true faith, and that you would save our people and continue saving our people, and that you would make us instruments of your peace and salvation for them, that we might not ever take away from your gospel or scandalize you by the way that we live, that we might be a unified witness about the high standard and high calling of your Son, Jesus. And Father, we just want to pray for those who, especially who live around us, but all those who consider themselves Christians but have not even worked for the high calling, haven't felt interested in that, haven't really felt the burden on them of the weight of their sin and the way that even if they say they love you, that their sin is killing them. We just pray, Lord, that you would bring about a spirit of repentance, that you would help them to see themselves and hate that which is wrong and sinful, and to renounce that and turn to you and find you sure to save. We want to ask that you would undo the words of those easy believer Christians, those prosperity gospel Christians, those who lead people to believe that it is an easy thing that we do here. It's the hardest thing. It's the highest calling. And we want to thank you for those who live up to that calling, especially those around the world who live in areas of extreme danger and persecution. I want to thank you for Voice of the Martyrs that does such good work, and we ask that you would help Johnathan be a strong instrument for them. We want to ask that you would bless Jonathan's ministry, bless his family, his wife, and his children. Help them all to seek and serve you in holiness and righteousness all their days. Help the Lenapah Baptist Church to hold up the banner of Christ to those in that town, that they would be drawn to you and be truly converted, and that would be a church that is biblically recognizable until your Son comes again in glory. And I want to selfishly ask that you would bless the Methodists here with the same blessing. We know that not everybody is going to be saved, Father, but we want to be a part of those who are saved and your saving work here and now. So, Lord, Cleanse us, purify us, burn away that which is not fitting for true believers, and help us to be living examples, ambassadors, Father, of who you are and who you've called us to be. We ask these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Want to just congratulate you if you've made it through this conversation. I know you've benefited. There's no way someone listens to a conversation this long and doesn't benefit. I hope everything we've said points towards Jesus, and that you are blessed and that you are now a blessing where you're going, to who you're with. God bless you.